Commander Veriska stood in the briefing room of the Harmonious Endeavor, her 4 eyes scanning the new crew roster with barely concealed disappointment. The research vessel had just taken on additional security personnel at the last station, and among them were humans. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the stories about humanity's warriors, according to the tailies. Spreading through spacer bars and military academies, humans were unstoppable in combat. They fought like demons possessed, never surrendered even when defeat was certain, and could adapt to any combat situation within moments. Some stories claimed humans could continue fighting with injuries that would kill most species outright. Others insisted that human soldiers bonded so deeply with their squad members that they became a single fighting organism. Veriska found it all very tiresome. She was Kickstarry, a species that had perfected the art of warfare over 10,000 years. Her people had conquered 17 star systems through superior tactics, advanced technology, and logical military doctrine. They studied war the way others studied art. Every Kickstarry officer spent decades learning strategy, logistics, and the psychology of combat. They knew that victory came from careful planning, not wild emotion or reckless bravery. When she finally met Lieutenant Sarah Chun and her security team in the cargo bay, Veriska had to suppress the urge to laugh. The humans looked so ordinary. Lieutenant Chun stood barely tall enough to reach Veriska's shoulder. She had no natural armor, no claws, no visible weapons growing from her body. Her skin looked soft and easily damaged. The other humans in her squad were similarly unimpressive. They wore standard-issue armor and carried conventional weapons, nothing special at all. "Commander Veriska," Sarah said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "It's an honor to serve under your tactical command." Veriska touched the human's hand briefly. It was warm and delicate, with no protective scales or hardened skin. How did such soft creatures survive on their homeworld? "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Chen," Veriska replied, keeping her voice professional. "I trust you and your team are familiar with shipboard combat protocols?" "Yes, ma'am. We've reviewed all the standard procedures. My team is ready for whatever comes." Whatever comes. The phrase amused Veriska. These humans had likely never seen real combat. The galaxy had been mostly peaceful since humanity joined the community 5 years ago. They probably thought security duty meant checking identification badges and responding to the occasional drunk passenger. Over the next few days, Veriska observed the human security team during their duties. They seemed competent enough at basic tasks. They ran their patrol routes on time, maintained their equipment properly, and followed orders without complaint. But Veriska noticed nothing exceptional about them. If anything, they seemed less disciplined than her Kickstarry warriors. They joked with each other during duty hours, sometimes broke into informal formations, and generally appeared too relaxed for proper military bearing. One evening, Veriska found herself sharing a meal with Lieutenant Chun in the officers' mess. The human ate something that smelled vaguely poisonous, but she seemed to enjoy it. "I've been reading about human military history," Veriska said, deciding to address the elephant in the room, as humans would say. "Very interesting. Your species seems to have spent a great deal of time fighting each other." Sarah nodded, swallowing her food. "Yeah, we've had our share of conflicts. Probably more than our share, honestly. The records mention something called World War II. Hundreds of battles, millions of casualties. And yet the soldiers kept fighting even when their positions were hopeless." "That sounds about right," Sarah said calmly. "I find it curious," Veriska continued. "Kickstarry doctrine teaches that a tactical retreat is sometimes the wisest choice. Preserve your forces for a better opportunity. Yet human forces rarely retreated, even when logic demanded it." Sarah smiled, a slight curve of her lips. We call those tactical advances in the opposite direction sometimes. But yeah, humans have a complicated relationship with giving up. Is it pride? Veriska asked. Or perhaps your species simply doesn't understand proper risk assessment. Maybe a bit of both, Sarah admitted. Or maybe we're just stubborn. My grandmother used to say that humans are too stupid to know when they're beaten. So we just keep fighting until we win or we're dead. Veriska found this philosophy deeply illogical, but she kept that opinion to herself. Instead, she changed the subject to the ship's current mission. They were heading to negotiate with the Krell Collective, an isolationist group that rarely spoke with outsiders. The mission was considered routine, low risk, perfect for a research vessel with minimal military capabilities. I don't anticipate any combat situations, Veriska explained. But if something unexpected happens, I'll need your team to follow standard defensive protocols. Hold assigned positions, maintain communication discipline, and retreat to secondary positions if the first line is breached. Understood, Sarah said. But Veriska noticed a flicker of something in the human's eyes. Was it amusement? You disagree with the protocol? Veriska asked. No, ma'am. We'll follow your orders. It's just, human combat doctrine is sometimes different from standard galactic procedures. We tend to be more flexible in our approach. Flexible, Veriska repeated. That's a diplomatic way of saying undisciplined. Sarah's smile widened slightly. Call it what you want. But humans learned a long time ago that rigid plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. We adapt. Veriska wanted to explain that proper military planning accounted for multiple contingencies. That adaptation was built into good tactics. That calling chaos flexibility was just excusing poor preparation. But she said nothing. The humans would learn soon enough if they ever faced real combat. They would discover that war was not an adventure story where plucky determination won the day. It was mathematics, logistics, and cold calculation. That night, alone in her quarters, Veriska reviewed the human security files again. She read about Earth's history of warfare, the endless conflicts and battles. She saw the casualty numbers, the descriptions of brutal fighting, the accounts of last stands and desperate defenses, and yet she remained unconvinced. Every species had war stories. Every culture romanticized its warriors. The humans were simply newer to the galactic stage, so their myths seemed fresher and more dramatic. In time, they would settle into reality like everyone else. They would learn that the universe rewarded careful planning and logical thinking, not emotional gestures and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Veriska closed the files and prepared for sleep. In a few days, they would reach the Krell Collective's territory. The mission would proceed smoothly. The humans would perform their basic security duties adequately, and life would continue as expected. She had no idea how wrong she was. The warning alarm screamed through the harmonious Endeavor 3 seconds before the first impact. Veriska was on the bridge, reviewing navigation charts, when the ship's defensive systems detected incoming vessels. Multiple vessels, moving fast and broadcasting no identification codes. Shields up, she commanded, her training taking over instantly. All hands to battle stations. But the attackers were already too close. The first volley of plasma fire slammed into the ship's port side before the shields could fully activate. The harmonious Endeavor shuddered violently, throwing crew members against their stations. Red emergency lights flooded the bridge as systems began failing. Report. Veriska snapped. 8 hostile vessels, the sensor officer called out. Ravager clan signatures. They're launching boarding pods. Veriska felt her blood chill. The Ravager clans were the most feared pirates in the sector. They didn't just steal cargo. They took entire crews as slaves, selling them to the highest bidder. And they were notorious for never retreating once they committed to an attack. Seal all bulkheads, she ordered. Security teams to defensive positions. Prepare to repel boarders. The ship had 23 security personnel total. The Ravagers had at least 100 warriors on those ships, possibly more. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. The harmonious Endeavor would fall within the hour. But Veriska was kick-starry. She would make them pay for every meter of corridor. She pulled up the tactical display, quickly assigning positions to her security teams. The kick-starry warriors would hold the bridge and the main corridors. The other species on the security roster would defend the crew quarters and engineering. And the humans, Veriska assigned Lieutenant Chen and her 5-person team to the aft section, a cluster of storage bays and maintenance passages near the ship's engines. It was the least important area, with no critical systems and no valuable cargo. If the humans couldn't hold it, the loss wouldn't affect the overall defense. She expected them to hold for 10 minutes, maybe 15 if they were lucky, before she would need to pull them back to a secondary position. All teams. Acknowledge positions, she transmitted over the ship-wide comm. One by one, the security teams reported in. Lieutenant Chun's voice came through last, calm and steady. Aft section, acknowledged. We're in position. Hold as long as you can, Lieutenant, Veriska said. When the pressure becomes too great, fall back to Junction 7. We'll cover your retreat. Understood, Commander. Though I don't think we'll need to retreat. Veriska didn't have time to address the humans' misplaced confidence. The first boarding pod hit the hull with a thunderous crash, followed by another, then 3 more in quick succession. The Ravagers were coming. The aliens that poured through the breached hull were nightmares made flesh. Each Ravager stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored exoskeletons that could deflect most small arms fire. They carried weapons designed to tear through ship hulls, let alone unarmored flesh. Their faces had no eyes, only sensory pits that could detect heat and movement in complete darkness. The fighting started immediately. Veriska watched the tactical display as her kick-starry warriors engaged the first wave of Ravagers near the port docking bay. Plasma fire lit up the corridors. Her warriors fought well, using proper cover and overlapping fields of fire. But the Ravagers kept coming, absorbing losses that would make any sane commander retreat, pushing forward through sheer numbers. One by one, sections of the ship began to fall. The Ravagers advanced methodically through the port side, forcing her teams back. Veriska adjusted her defensive lines, pulled warriors from less critical areas, tried to create choke points where superior tactics could overcome inferior numbers. Then she noticed something strange on the tactical display. The aft section, where she had assigned the humans, showed Ravager contacts. 3 boarding pods had breached directly into the storage bays. She expected to see the human team's life signs retreating, or more likely, winking out as they were overwhelmed. Instead, the Ravager contacts were moving backward. Veriska stared at the display, certain there must be a sensor malfunction. The Ravagers didn't retreat. It wasn't in their nature. They attacked until they won or until they were all dead. Yet the tactical overlay clearly showed the alien contacts pulling back from the aft section, regrouping near the breach points. Lieutenant Chun, she transmitted. Report your status. Sarah's voice came back immediately, not even breathing hard. Aft section secure, Commander. We've neutralized 15 hostiles. The others have pulled back to their entry points. I think they're waiting for reinforcements. 15? The humans had killed 15 Ravagers? Impossible. 5 humans against 15 Ravagers should have resulted in 5 dead humans in approximately 3 minutes. Are you certain of that count, Lieutenant? Veriska asked. Yes, ma'am. We've got bodies. Do you need us to move forward and support other sections? Veriska checked the tactical display again. The rest of her security teams were barely holding their positions, giving ground slowly but steadily. Meanwhile, the aft section showed no Ravager advancement at all. The aliens had actually created a defensive perimeter around their breach points, something they never did. They were treating the human-held area like it was too dangerous to advance into. "Negative," Veriska said slowly. "Hold your position. I'm sending you camera access. I want to see what's happening down there." She pulled up the security feeds from the aft section, expecting to see the humans dug into defensive positions, probably low on ammunition and waiting for the inevitable second assault. What she saw instead made no sense at all. The humans weren't holding a defensive position. They were moving, constantly moving. Two of them had positioned themselves in a ventilation shaft with a clear view of the main corridor. Another was crouched behind a stack of cargo containers that had been moved into a makeshift barrier. But the barrier was positioned offensively, blocking the Ravager's line of advance rather than protecting a fallback point. Lieutenant Chen herself was nowhere to be seen on the primary cameras. Veriska switched through different angles until she found the human officer crawling through a maintenance conduit that ran above the Ravager's position. She was carrying something that looked like it had been assembled from medical supplies and spare parts. What is she doing? Veriska muttered to herself. The answer came 10 seconds later when Sarah dropped from the conduit directly onto a Ravager's back. The homemade device in her hands exploded, a small shaped charge that punched through the alien's armor at point-blank range. The Ravager went down, and Sarah was already rolling away before its companions could react. The other humans opened fire immediately, not from their previous positions but from new angles. They had moved during the distraction, creating crossfire that caught the Ravagers in a kill zone. Veriska watched in stunned silence as the second Ravager assault fell apart. The aliens retreated again, leaving more bodies behind. And the humans pursued them. Forcing the Ravagers back to their breach points and pinning them there with precise covering fire. This wasn't how smaller forces fought larger ones. This wasn't careful defense and tactical retreat. This was aggressive, almost reckless combat that somehow worked. The humans moved like they knew exactly where the Ravagers would be, set traps like they could read the aliens' minds, and fought with a coordination that suggested years of training together. Veriska knew for a fact that Lieutenant Chen's team had only been formed 3 months ago. "Commander," her first officer said quietly, "the main defensive line is failing. We need to pull back to the bridge." Veriska looked at the overall tactical display. He was right. The Ravagers were breaking through in multiple locations. In another 10 minutes, they would overrun the command deck. The ship was lost, but the aft section was still secure. 5 humans were holding off an entire assault force. "Belay that order," Veriska said. "Lieutenant Chen, I'm redirecting 2 Ravager groups toward your position. Can you hold?" Sarah's response was immediate. "Send them. We're just getting warmed up." Veriska didn't believe what she was hearing, but she also didn't have any better options. She began redirecting her remaining forces, creating a fighting retreat that would funnel the Ravagers toward the aft section, toward the humans, toward the warriors she had dismissed as ordinary and unimpressive, toward the squad that was about to prove every single story she had heard was absolutely true. Veriska could not stop watching the security feeds. She knew she should be coordinating the overall defense, managing her warriors, planning fallback positions. But her eyes kept returning to the aft section cameras, where 5 humans were doing something that should have been impossible. The Ravagers had committed a full assault team to the aft section now. 23 warriors in heavy armor. They moved in standard attack formation, covering each other's advances, using their superior size and strength to push through obstacles. It was the same formation that had broken through every other defensive position on the ship. The humans didn't seem to care. Variska watched as Lieutenant Chen's team split up, each taking a different position in the maze of storage corridors. There was no defensive line anymore, no fallback position, no clear strategy that she could identify. They were just scattered. It looked like chaos. It looked like 5 separate soldiers fighting 5 separate battles. But it wasn't chaos at all. Ravager turned a corner and found itself facing empty corridor. It advanced cautiously, sensors sweeping for heat signatures. Behind it, a ventilation grate silently opened. Private Martinez dropped down, landed on the Ravager's shoulders, and drove a combat knife through a gap in its armor plating. The alien went down without making a sound. Martinez was back in the vent before the body hit the floor. 3 corridors away, Sergeant Williams stood in plain sight at the end of a long passage. A Ravager spotted her and charged, trusting its armor and size to overwhelm the small human. Williams didn't move. She just stood there, weapon aimed, as the alien closed the distance. 10 meters. 5 meters. 3 meters. Mariska wanted to scream at the human to run, to take cover, to do anything except stand still. But Williams waited until the Ravager was almost on top of her, then fired a single shot at the ceiling. The shot hit an overhead pipe that Martinez had weakened earlier. Pressurized coolant exploded outward, flash freezing the Ravager in mid-stride. Williams calmly walked around the frozen statue and disappeared into a side passage. The trap had been set before the Ravagers even entered that corridor. The humans were thinking 3 steps ahead. Another camera showed Corporal Jackson engaged in close combat with a Ravager. The alien was winning, its superior strength forcing Jackson back against a bulkhead. Then, Jackson did something Variska had never seen in any combat manual. He stopped resisting and went completely limp, letting the Ravager's own momentum carry them both forward. The alien stumbled, off balance, and Jackson used that split second to slip sideways. The Ravager's strike hit the bulkhead instead, and Jackson put 3 shots into its sensory organs at point-blank range. Variska realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just fighting the Ravagers. They were hunting them. They were using the ship itself as a weapon, turning every corridor into a trap, every junction into a kill zone. And they were doing it with an efficiency that suggested this was normal for them. She switched cameras again and found Lieutenant Chen. The human officer was injured now. A plasma burn along her left arm that had melted through her armor and charred the flesh beneath. That injury would have sent any Kickstarry warrior to the medical bay immediately. Plasma burns were excruciating, and the damaged nerves made the limb useless. Chun had tied a piece of torn fabric around the wound and was still fighting. Still leading her team. Still moving through the corridors like the pain didn't exist. Variska watched as Chun rounded a corner and came face to face with a Ravager. The alien swung a massive blade at the human's head. Chun ducked under it, the blade missing by centimeters, and grabbed onto the Ravager's arm with her good hand. She used the alien's size against it, letting its own swing pull her up and around onto its back. Then she pressed her sidearm against the base of its skull and fired. The Ravager dropped. Chun rolled off its back, landed badly on her injured arm, and Variska heard her grunt of pain over the comm. But she was already moving again, calling out positions to her team in that same steady voice. Martinez, vent route Delta. Williams, covering fire on my mark. Jackson, prep the surprise we discussed. What surprise? Variska checked the tactical overlay and saw that the humans had somehow herded the remaining Ravagers into one of the main storage bays. All 15 surviving aliens were concentrated in a single large room, probably thinking they had finally cornered the humans. Now, Chun said quietly, the humans had rigged the bay's atmosphere controls. Veriska watched in shock as they vented all the oxygen from the room in 3 seconds, replacing it with pure nitrogen. The Ravagers, who breathed oxygen just like most species, collapsed within moments. No shots fired. No more fighting. Just cold, efficient use of the ship systems. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was completely inhuman in its creativity. The aft section was secure. 5 humans had eliminated or neutralized 38 Ravagers without losing a single team member. The mathematics didn't work. The tactics didn't make sense. And yet, it had happened. All Ravager forces are pulling back, her sensor officer reported. They're returning to their ships. Veriska looked at the overall tactical display. The Ravagers were retreating. The Ravager clans, who had never retreated from any engagement in recorded history, were abandoning the assault. They had taken too many casualties, suffered too many losses, and encountered something they had never expected. They had encountered humans. The bridge crew erupted in relieved celebration, but Veriska barely heard them. She was still watching the aft section cameras, watching Lieutenant Chun check on her team, watching the humans secure the area with practiced efficiency. Williams was limping from what looked like a fractured leg. Martinez had a deep cut across his face. Jackson was breathing heavily, probably had broken ribs from that bulkhead impact. And Chun's arm was a mess of burned tissue. None of them had stopped fighting. None of them had retreated. None of them had even slowed down. Veriska thought about all the stories she had dismissed as exaggeration. Humans who fought with impossible injuries. Humans who refused to surrender. Humans who turned losing battles into victories. Through sheer refusal to accept defeat. She had been so certain those stories were myths, propaganda, the kind of legends every species told about their warriors, but she had watched. It happened with her own eyes, recorded it on her ship's systems. There was no denying what she had seen. The humans weren't just competent soldiers. They weren't just well-trained or experienced. They were something else entirely. They were a species that had evolved to keep fighting when logic said to stop, to push through pain that would incapacitate others, to adapt and overcome when adaptation should have been impossible. Veriska had studied warfare for her entire adult life. She had memorized 1,000 tactical manuals, learned from the greatest military minds in the galaxy, and thought she understood combat. She understood nothing. "Commander," her first officer said, "should we organize a security sweep of the ship?" Veriska nodded absently, still staring at the screens. Lieutenant Chun was helping Martinez with his facial wound, using what looked like a standard medical kit. The human was laughing about something, actually laughing, with blood running down his face and a ship full of dead Ravagers behind him. "Yes," Veriska said quietly, "and bring Lieutenant Chun to the bridge when the aft section is secured. I need to speak with her." She needed to understand. She needed to know how 5 humans had done what her entire security force could not. She needed to learn what she was missing, what piece of the puzzle would make this all make sense. But deep down, Veriska was beginning to suspect that understanding humans might be impossible for someone who wasn't human. Their entire approach to combat, to pain, to survival itself was fundamentally alien to her way of thinking. The question was whether she could learn to think like them, or whether that kind of thinking was something you had to be born with, something that came from evolving on a world that made survival itself an act of defiance. She would find out soon enough. Lieutenant Sarah Chun arrived on the bridge 40 minutes after the Ravagers retreated. Her left arm was properly bandaged now, held in a sling, but Veriska could see the plasma burn through the medical wrapping. The human's face was pale, probably from pain and blood loss, but she stood straight and alert as she gave her formal report. "Aft section secured, Commander. No remaining hostile contacts." We've documented all eliminated threats and secured the breach points. My team is ready to assist with ship-wide security sweeps. Veriska looked at the human officer with new eyes. This small, soft-looking being had just led her team through combat that would have broken most warriors. And now she was offering to keep working, despite injuries that should have put her in medical stasis. "Stand down, Lieutenant," Veriska said. "Your team has done more than enough. Report to medical immediately." "That's in order." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted. My team performed well today. I'm proud of them. But I want you to know that this wasn't anything special by human standards. This was just Tuesday for us. Just Tuesday." Veriska almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. What she had witnessed on those security feeds was the most impressive combat performance she had ever seen. And the human was calling it routine. "I watched the recordings," Veriska said quietly. "I have many questions. I'll answer what I can, Commander. Though I should probably do it sitting down. I'm feeling a bit lightheaded." Veriska quickly arranged for medical staff to set up in the briefing room next to the bridge. She wanted answers before the human's injuries forced her into treatment. They sat across from each other at the conference table while a medical tech worked on Chine's arm. "How did you do it?" Veriska asked. 5 soldiers against 38 ravagers. The mathematics alone say you should have been overwhelmed in the first 3 minutes. Sarah smiled slightly. Humans aren't very good at math when it comes to combat. We tend to ignore the numbers and focus on the problem. Can we win? That's the only question that matters to us. But you couldn't have known you would win. The logical assessment of the situation was clear defeat. Sure, logically, we were going to lose. But humans have this thing where we don't really accept logical defeat until we're actually dead. And sometimes not even then. Veriska leaned forward. Explain that. How can you ignore logic? Logic is the foundation of tactical thinking. The medical tech injected something into Chun's arm. The human winced but continued speaking. Logic says that if something is impossible, you shouldn't try it. Human history is full of people who did impossible things anyway. We walked across entire continents when logic said we'd die. We sailed across oceans when everyone said we'd fall off the edge of the world. We went to our moon when the math said it couldn't be done. But those are different situations. You had time to plan, to prepare. Combat doesn't give you that luxury. No, but combat gives you something else. Fear. Pain. The absolute certainty that you might die in the next 10 seconds. And humans have learned over millions of years that the best response to that feeling is to keep moving forward. We evolved as persistence hunters, Commander. We didn't catch prey by being faster or stronger. We caught it by following it until it collapsed from exhaustion. We literally ran animals to death over days and weeks. Veriska thought about that. Her own species had evolved as ambush predators, striking hard and fast from cover. The idea of pursuit over days seemed wasteful and inefficient. That's biology, she said. What about the tactical coordination I saw? Your team moved like they had trained together for years. 3 months, Sarah said. We've only been a team for 3 months. Impossible. The coordination I witnessed requires years of bonding, of building trust, of learning each other's patterns. Sarah shook her head. Humans bond fast, especially in military situations. It's survival instinct. We know we're fragile compared to most species in the galaxy, so we learn to rely on each other absolutely. When I tell Martinez to take a vent route, he knows I'm not sending him into a death trap. When Williams provides covering fire, Jackson knows she won't miss. That trust gets built fast because we don't have time to waste. And the injuries? I saw you fighting with a plasma burn that should have incapacitated you. I saw your team members continue combat with broken bones and serious wounds. The medical tech finished with Chun's arm and moved to check her other vital signs. Sarah looked down at the bandaged limb. Pain is just information, Commander. It tells you something is damaged. But it doesn't mean you have to stop. Human pain tolerance is actually pretty high compared to most species. We can push through things that would drop others. Is it smart? Probably not. Is it logical? Definitely not. But it works. And when it doesn't work, when pushing through the pain gets you killed. Sarah met her eyes. Then we die. But we die fighting, not cowering. There are worse ways to go. Variska sat back in her chair, trying to process this. Everything the human was describing went against her military training. Kikstari doctrine emphasized preservation of forces, tactical retreat when necessary, logical assessment of risks versus rewards. What Chun was describing was controlled insanity. I need to understand something, Variska said. When you dropped onto that Ravager's back with your homemade explosive, you could have died. If the timing was wrong by even a second, the other Ravagers would have killed you. Why take that risk? Because it worked. But you couldn't have known it would work. I thought it had a decent chance of working. That was good enough. A decent chance is not certainty. Sarah smiled. Commander, humans almost never have certainty in combat. We have best guesses and gut instincts and hope. And then we commit to the action anyway. Because hesitation gets you killed faster than a risky decision. That makes no sense. I know. But it's true anyway. The medical tech finished her examination and reported that Chun needed to go to the medical bay for proper treatment. The plasma burn was serious, and there might be nerve damage that required specialized care. Sarah stood carefully, steadying herself against the table. One more question, Variska said. The stories I heard about human warriors. They said humans fight like demons, never surrender, adapt to anything, bond like family with their squad. I thought those stories were exaggerations. They're not exaggerations, Commander. If anything, they don't capture the full picture. You saw one small fight today. Earth has thousands of years of warfare in our history. Battles where humans held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. Last stands where a few dozen fighters held off thousands. Comebacks that defied every tactical assessment. Why? Why do you fight that way? Sarah paused at the door, thinking about her answer. Because we're human. We don't have armor or claws or natural weapons. We're not the biggest or the strongest or the fastest. So we had to become the most stubborn, the most adaptable, the most absolutely unwilling to give up. It's not tactics, Commander. It's who we are at a fundamental level. After Chun left for medical, Variska sat alone in the briefing room for a long time. She pulled up the combat recordings again, watching them with new understanding. Every move the humans made, every risk they took, every injury they fought through now made a terrible kind of sense. They weren't ignoring logic. They were operating on a different logic entirely, one based on evolutionary survival instincts rather than tactical calculation. They weren't being reckless. They were being human. And Variska realized with creeping certainty that the galaxy had no idea what it was dealing with. Humanity had joined the community as friends, as allies, as peaceful explorers and traders. Everyone saw their technology, their culture, their eagerness to learn. No one had seriously considered what humanity would be like as enemies. What a species like this could do if they decided to make war instead of peace. Variska stood and walked to the bridge view screen, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other species were making the same mistake she had made. Dismissing the stories. Underestimating the humans. Thinking they were just another species. Nothing special. She needed to write a report. She needed to tell her superiors what she had learned. but she wasn't sure they would believe her any more than she had believed the stories. Some things, she realized, you had to see with your own eyes to understand. And even then, understanding humans might be beyond most species in the galaxy. All she knew for certain was that she was very, very glad they were on her side. The harmonious Endeavor limped toward Nexus Station on emergency power. The journey took 6 days instead of the usual 2, giving Veriska plenty of time to think about what had happened. She spent most of that time reviewing the combat footage, writing her report, and trying to reconcile what she had witnessed with everything she thought she knew about warfare. On the 3rd day, she filed an encrypted transmission to Kixthari High Command. The report was careful, detailed, and filled with tactical analysis. But the conclusion was simple and direct. Humanity represents a military variable that current galactic combat models do not account for. Their approach to warfare is fundamentally different from any known species. They should not be underestimated or dismissed, regardless of their physical limitations or apparent technological parity. With other races, she knew the report would be controversial. Military doctrine was built on thousands of years of study. Suggesting that one new species could change the basic understanding of combat would make her look foolish or worse. But Veriska had not survived this long by ignoring evidence. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Chun returned to active duty. The medical staff had repaired most of the plasma damage to her arm, though she would carry the scars permanently. She found Veriska in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. "Commander," Sarah said, approaching carefully. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course, Lieutenant. Please, sit." They sat in companionable silence for a while. The observation lounge was quiet, with most of the crew resting or repairing damage. Through the viewport, stars drifted slowly past. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Veriska said finally, "about human combat philosophy. And I have a request, ma'am. I want you to train some of my Kixthari warriors. Not in human tactics exactly, but in understanding the human mindset. The way you think about combat. Your approach to problems." Sarah looked surprised. "I'm not sure that's teachable, Commander. A lot of it is cultural and evolutionary. We grew up with these instincts." "I know, but perhaps some of it can be learned. The adaptability, the refusal to accept defeat, the creative use of available resources. These are valuable skills regardless of species." "I can try," Sarah said slowly, "but I need to be honest with you. Teaching someone to think like a human in combat might make them less effective, not more. Our way isn't always the best way. It's just our way." Veriska turned to face the human officer. "What do you mean?" "Humans take casualties that could be avoided with proper tactical retreat. We push through injuries that require more healing time later. We take risks that sometimes don't pay off. Our approach works for us because we've evolved to handle it physically and psychologically. But a Kixthari warrior trying to fight like a human might just get themselves killed." It was an honest assessment, and Veriska appreciated it. Then teach them to understand human thinking, not to copy it. Help them recognize when they're facing human opponents or allies. Give them the context to work effectively with your species. "That I can do," Sarah agreed. "When do we start?" They began the next day. Sarah gathered a group of Kixthari warriors in the ship's small training room and started with the basics. She didn't teach them to fight like humans. Instead, she taught them to think about combat the way humans did. Kixthari doctrine teaches you to assess a situation and choose the most logical response, Sarah explained. Human doctrine teaches us to assess a situation and then do whatever gives us the best chance of winning, even if it's not logical. One of the Kixthari warriors, a veteran named Krelix, raised his hand. "But logic is how we determine the best chance of winning." "Usually, yes," Sarah agreed. but not always. Sometimes the logical choice is to retreat because you're outnumbered 3-1. The human choice is to find a way to make those odds irrelevant. Change the terrain. Create an ambush. Exploit a weakness. Or just hit so hard and fast that the enemy doesn't have time to use their numerical advantage. That sounds like desperation, not tactics. It is desperation. Controlled, directed, weaponized desperation. Humans got very good at that over millions of years of being the weaker species on our planet. Veriska watched from the back of the room as Sarah explained human military history. She talked about battles where a few hundred humans held off thousands of enemies. Sieges that lasted months with defenders who refused to surrender. Naval engagements where damaged ships continued fighting long after they should have been destroyed. The HFY warriors listened with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. Veriska understood the feeling. She had felt the same way before watching the security footage. "Let me show you something," Sarah said. She pulled up a tactical simulation, a standard training scenario that HFY warriors practiced regularly. It showed a small team defending a position against superior numbers. "Krelix, how would you handle this situation?" The veteran studied the scenario carefully. Establish overlapping fields of fire at the choke points. Fall back to secondary positions when the first line is breached. Hold until reinforcements arrive or until evacuation is feasible. "Good, solid tactics," Sarah said. "That's the logical approach. Now let me show you how a human might handle it." She reset the simulation and ran it with human parameters. The small defending team didn't establish defensive positions. They split up, used the environment aggressively, set traps, and engaged in running firefights that pulled the attackers into kill zones. It was chaos compared to the HFY approach, but it worked. The simulation ended with the defending team victorious, though with higher casualties than the logical approach would have suffered. "Higher losses," Krelix observed. "Less efficient." "True," Sarah agreed. "But we won when logic said we should have lost." Sometimes winning is more important than efficiency. The training continued for several days. The HFY warriors didn't learn to fight like humans, but they learned to understand human fighting. They learned to recognize human tactical patterns, to predict human responses, to work alongside human allies effectively. More importantly, they learned to respect human warriors. Veriska watched as her veterans, some of whom had served for decades, developed a grudging admiration for the human approach to combat. On the last day before they reached Nexus Station, Sarah invited Veriska to observe a training exercise. The HFY warriors were running combat simulations, but this time they were trying to incorporate some human thinking into their tactics. It was awkward at first. The HFY weren't built for the kind of aggressive, improvisational fighting that humans excelled at. But Veriska noticed something interesting. When faced with impossible scenarios, her warriors were starting to look for alternative solutions instead of accepting defeat. They were adapting. After the session, Veriska and Sarah stood together watching the warriors review their performance. "Thank you for doing this," Veriska said. "I know it wasn't easy." "It's been interesting," Sarah replied. "Your warriors are good. Really good. They just needed to see that there are other ways to think about combat." "I owe you an apology," Veriska said quietly. "When you first came aboard, I dismissed you and your team as ordinary. I thought the stories about human warriors were exaggerations. A lot of people think that, until they see humans fight. I was arrogant. I thought HFY tactical doctrine was superior simply because it was logical and well established. But watching your team during the Ravager attack showed me that there are other kinds of superiority." Sarah smiled. "Our way isn't better than yours, Commander. It's just different. The best approach would probably combine both." Kickstarry logic and planning with human adaptability and stubbornness. Is that possible? I don't know, but it's worth trying. Nexus Station appeared on the view screen, a massive structure of metal and light floating against the stars. The Harmonious Endeavor would dock there for repairs, and then the crew would disperse to their next assignments. Veriska didn't know if she would serve with humans again, but she knew she would never forget the lesson she had learned. That evening, Veriska made a final entry in her personal log. The words came easily, summarizing everything she had experienced. Recommendation for all Kickstarry military personnel: take human war stories seriously. They are not boasting or exaggeration. If anything, they understate the reality. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy, nor the fastest, nor the most technologically advanced. But they may be the most dangerous, simply because they never learned when to stop fighting. They treat impossible odds as a starting point rather than a conclusion. They push through pain and injury that would incapacitate most species. They adapt to situations faster than should be possible. And they bond with their fellow soldiers in ways that create a force multiplier that tactical models cannot predict. She paused, considering her next words carefully. I am grateful that humanity chose to join the galactic community as allies rather than conquerors. I suspect that if they had chosen differently, the outcome would have been very different from what most species assume. We have welcomed them as equals, as partners in exploration and trade. But we should never forget that behind their friendly demeanor and eagerness to learn lies a warrior species that has been honing its combat skills for millions of years. Not against external enemies, but against their own planet.